The lights are on, the camera's on, the mics are hot. Let's go. I'm Jordan with SonicAire, and thanks for joining us today to talk about what else but combustible dust. And so my guest today is Jeff Nichols. He's the managing partner at Industrial Fire Prevention, and he's been doing this for quite a while. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm great. It is good to see you. Good to be with you again.
Good to see you again.
And so Jeff and I connected, it's probably been 10 or 12 years ago now, back on LinkedIn, back in a small group of combustible dust nerds talking about all things combustible dust. And I probably learned way more than Jeff did during those days. Jeff was just there sharing his expertise and knowledge of the industry, and I was there learning everything I could about dust and combustible dust and trying to soak it all up as much as I could. But we then were able to meet up in person. I believe the first time we met was at the International Woodworking Fair quite a few years ago, and then we happened to just meet a couple of weeks ago again there at the International Woodworking Fair. So it was good to see you and good to be with you again.
Oh, yeah, it was. Really good to see you.
So tell everyone a little bit about how your combustible dust journey began and kind of where it started and what you're doing now.
Well, I'm honored to be here, by the way. Thank you for inviting me.
Of
I
course.
appreciate it. I knew, I met Brad when he started SonicAire, and I met you as soon as you were hired on there, I think. So it's really been a great journey watching you guys. So really appreciate you having me on. I started back in 1979 when they first started importing spark detection systems to the United States. I went to work for a company that was importing them and representing a German company. And I started out in shipping and receiving, going to night school to get an electronics degree to become an electronic technician. I started traveling the country for them as an electronic technician, starting up spark detection systems on dust collection systems. So I became very familiar with dust collection back in my 20s, and it was a great gig when you're in your 20s traveling around on a company credit card doing that kind of stuff. So it was fun, and I eventually got into sales, and that's kind of where we started, if that helps.
Yeah. So you've been around the block a little while. So if anybody can be considered an expert in combustible dust, I think it's Jeff Nichols for sure.
I think I've got several decades experience, so I can say that. But there's a lot of people I have met, especially in the NFPA committees, that have probably forgotten more than I'll ever know. These guys, unbelievable, and a lot of them are retired by now. By the way, so.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into talking about dust control. So help us understand the importance of dust control and connecting that to just overall workplace safety, because we all want to be a part of a safer, healthier workplace and work environment. So let's talk about dust control and how that relates to that big picture.
Yeah, dust control, it's a big deal in manufacturing facilities. We've got, first of all, it's a health and safety. It's both a health and safety issue, but first of all, it's primarily a health issue. If you're walking through these plants and you see a dust cloud, you don't know what you're breathing. Mm-hmm. And so it's primarily a health issue as far as, respiratory issues, both short-term and long-term. And then secondly, I deal with combustible dust, so it's a safety issue from that point. We deal with combustible dust that is, of course, flammable and sometimes explosive. So that's the second issue that we deal with, or that's my main focus around there.
Sure. And you mentioned earlier you were talking about spark detection.
Yeah.
And so help us, first let's define what spark detection is. So if you're new to combustible dust and new to dealing with that and handling that, talk about spark detection. Where does spark detection occur? What does that involve? And how does that create a safer work environment?
In the process industries, in manufacturing, anytime you're moving or manipulating a product, you're possibly creating fines or dust if you're sawing, cutting, sanding, shaping, any kind of a material that can create dust. Now you've got a dust hazard, so it's usually controlled by a engineered dust collection system, which will pull the dust off of the machinery, the saws, and take it out to typically to an outside dust collection and dust storage handling equipment. And so I forgot what the question was already.
Well, just defining spark detection.
Right, right. So anytime they're creating, manipulating these products, cutting, sanding, shaping, they're also creating heat, friction, and sparks. And so a lot of times these sparks will get sucked up into the dust collection system. So we'll add spark detection system, which is basically high-speed infrared detectors on that ductwork. And further downstream, we may extinguish or suppress or divert that spark or ember or fire out of the system to a safe location.
So what is the result if you don't have spark detection? What happens then?
Well, if you're creating combustible dust and you've got heat and friction in your process, then you have the recipe for a fire. You've got all three sides of the fire triangle. What we call the fire triangle in this business is anytime you've got oxygen and an ignition source and fuel, you've got the fire triangle. So they've got a potential fire hazard in the process without any kind of fire protection.
And then without that spark detection in the ductwork, you get a spark, travels through the ductwork, then bad things happen, right?
Yeah, because you're taking that spark out to typically to a dust collector where you've got a volume of dust in a dust cloud in a container. So now what you've got is what they call the deflagration. Anyway, five-sided unit.
That's, that's the Pentagon, yeah, the
Pentagon.
combustible dust Pentagon.
Yeah, I think I need another cup of coffee. So you've got the combustible dust Pentagon or the explosion Pentagon, where you've got the same thing as the fire triangle. You've got your fuel, ignition, oxygen. Now you've got it in a dust cloud, and now it's contained in an enclosure that could cause an explosion. And so it's easy to visualize if you think about a pile of fine sawdust on the ground smoldering, and some wind comes and picks it up and it creates a flash fire. But if you had that flash fire inside of a vessel, now you've got that flame front and pressure wave pushing out on the strength of this vessel. And if that pressure wave is stronger than the vessel, then you're going to get what they call a deflagration. And that sonic boom and shrapnel and fireball coming out of that vessel is what we call an explosion.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of some definitions when we're talking about these safety systems and how we add spark detection as a fire prevention system.
And that's the difference between a combustible dust situation and just your general fire safety stuff when we're talking about industrial environments. When I like to describe it to people, when we think about it as a kid and we're in a classroom and the fire alarm goes off and we do the drill and we have time to walk safely in a single file line outside to get to a safe place. Well, that's a fire. That's not a dust explosion. A dust explosion happens incredibly rapidly. And when it does, it's a pressure rise like you talked about. And generally the structure, the confinement blows out. And then you get structural collapse and it happens in less than a second even sometimes. And so unfortunately there's no escaping a situation like that. So we got to do everything we can to prevent those from happening in the first place.
Yeah. Even more dangerous are secondary explosions. If that vessel's strong, that explosion's like water. It's looking for the path of least resistance. If that path of least resistance is back into the plant through that ductwork, then that's where it's going to go. And that primary explosion causes a shock wave in the plant, and then all the dust starts raining down from rafters, walls, off the floors, the walls, off the equipment. Now you've got a secondary hazard, secondary dust cloud, where if that flame front hits it, now you've got a secondary explosion, which oftentimes blows the walls out, blows the fire protection out, the lighting, and people get trapped. And that's where we see catastrophes and people get injured and hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, bad news. All right, we've talked about the bad stuff. We talked about when it goes really wrong.
I don't know if we're getting too deep in the woods or not, but
No, I think it's important, especially if people are new to this industry and new to dust. I think
yeah.
it's always a good place to start there at the risk and understanding the risk and the importance of managing dust safely. So let's talk about some practical steps that companies can take to manage this and some different dust control measures that are easily accessible and understandable to people even at the shop floor level. Because a lot of times the people that you and I talk to are maybe executives and managers and leadership, but maybe let's start at the ground floor at the plant level.
Yeah, it's important for people to first understand what they're working around, and that's why I try to educate people about combustible dust. Even though I sell equipment, I've been asked many times to consult and to do dust hazard analysis, where we go in and look at where all the dust hazards are and ignition hazards are. But I prefer to sell the equipment to protect the plant, and I prefer to work with people long term doing that. And so I often refer them to other people to do a dust hazard analysis, but it really begins with that component and that education. As soon as you know that you've got dust that is combustible, now you've got to do several things. You got to make sure your dust collection system is engineered properly to extract that dust to a safe location. And then a lot of times, a secondary or another primary dust engineered solution would be your guys, the SonicAire fans, which are oscillating and creating an air curtain above the machinery to keep all the dust down at a lower level where it's easily managed, where you don't have to shut down production and go, do a massive cleaning of the whole plant. So that's why I like what you guys do, and that's really a system or a compatible system with dust collection. We've got to control that dust both these ways. Then we've got to add our engineered fire protection and explosion protection systems. And those are all layered systems where we start with spark detection to prevent any fires. Then we add the fire protection like our sprinklers and deluge systems in the plants and in the operating equipment and dust collection systems. Then we'll add the explosion protection systems. So we've got layered engineered safety systems throughout. So if we can control the dust and we can control the ignition hazards, then we can prevent the catastrophic secondary explosions from the primary explosions from the fires. That's really my whole goal, saving life safety.
The belts and suspenders approach.
Yeah.
So for the employee out on the production floor, they don't have control of the budget. They don't get to make the big purchasing decisions. But where should they start? What should they be on the lookout for? What can they do to raise awareness to issues like this?
Yeah, usually it starts from top down. If we can educate the top and they're concerned with their employees, then they'll put the right safeguards in practice. But if you're an employee or a frontline worker and you're walking through the plant and it looks hazy, it looks dusty, and you're not sure what you're breathing, that's a good indication that you might have a problem. I'm not saying it is a problem.
Sure.
But it's worth investigating, and it's worth noting how much dust is settling on the equipment that you're working at or walking by. If you've got more than a paper clip's width of dust accumulating on your machinery, you've got a potential for a hazard. Mm-hmm. And if you see it accumulating on the walls, on the trusses, on the lights, on the conduit, on the ductwork, you can assume that you've got enough dust in this plant possibly to cause a real catastrophic situation. So at that point, as a worker, you've got to start becoming concerned and start sending messages up the chain. Hey, this could be a problem.
Worth taking a look at, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If you can write your name in it, some people say.
Yes, that's right. If you can write your name in it, then it's a potential problem. And if OSHA comes in, they're going to fine you, if they see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and they're looking for it. They've reissued the National Emphasis Program. I'm sure aware of that, and it really caught my attention and my eye when I read through it. And I think on the executive summary, it said this document is for targeting businesses. And so there is definitely a target on manufacturers' back if they are handling or producing combustible dust. Ocean knows who you are, and
Yeah.
and they know where to find you. So yeah, it's a really big deal.
I've
All
been
right.
told, oh, we'll just wait till OSHA comes. And I'm like, well, they're not coming to look. They're coming to find you if they find stuff.
They are, and hopefully you don't have a more serious situation before they get there.
Yep.
So where do you see the future of dust control going? Do you see, everybody's talking about AI. Is that something you see coming into dust control in the future? What's next?
I think it is. My expertise really is in the fire prevention and fire protection business. So I don't pay a lot of attention to what's happening, and I'm really not a first adopter either. I kind of watch what's happening in technology, then adopt best practices. Mm-hmm. But looking at AI, and it's really an exciting time for technology, because you see AI, you see 5G, you see the Internet of Things, you see industrial progression, you see web progression, you see robotics, you see all these things coming. So that AI is going to be controlling a lot of our systems in our plants in the near future. So technology's coming, and I think that just thinking about it, thinking through that AI is going to be better able to help us control our dust collection systems. It's going to give us predictive analysis, predictive maintenance, predictive failure. So there's a lot of things AI is going to be able to automatically control dust collection systems because it's going to be able to predict where the problems are going to be. So I see a lot of possibilities for technology, even though I'm not in that technology space and dust collection space.
Yeah,
I'm pretty aware of what's going on there, but I'm not an expert in those areas.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people are still managing their combustible dust with an air wand.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's, we can go down a whole rabbit trail about how dangerous that is to do that. But if you think about the technology, I mean, that's the same thing we've been doing for 100 years. And so there's got to be better ways to do it. And you leveraging technology, especially when we're in a tough labor market like we are right now. I think there's better ways coming.
Yeah, and I think it will help reduce some of the labor. It'll take some of the human error out of process and systems and maintenance as well. It'll help predict a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, anything that we can minimize the management that we have to do is fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Can you share some best practices for training workers at all levels to help them recognize the dust? I know we talked about if you can write your name in it, if it's the thickness of a paper clip. Was there anything else that you would add to that? Just awareness and hazards to look out for around combustible dust.
Yeah, there's a lot of companies that incorporate combustible dust into their safety training, and I love to see that. And that's really should be a best practice. In the chemical industry, anytime you're working around any kind of a hazardous chemical or machinery, it's going to be labeled. I'd like to see that adopted into wood products, because combustible dust is a danger. There are some companies that have had catastrophic explosions, and now they know that fireball is going to be many times the size of that dust collector, so they will create an explosion zone around a piece of equipment and say, you cannot be in this while it's running. You cannot be in this area. Or if you are passing through this area, you got to have your flame-resistant clothing and, of course, all your other PPE on. So there are some people that are aware of this, but you still walk into plants where they're blowing dust around with backpack blowers.
Yes,
they're blowing with wands, and really they're just moving the dust from one location to another. And the finer that dust is, the higher it's going to settle in that plant, and the more dangerous it's going to be. So really, combustible dust education, and I hate to say it, but it really starts with the top down. If you're concerned with your employees and their safety, then you're going to bring that kind of training. You're going to bring the right engineering controls to handle that dust, the right engineering controls to prevent any fires and explosions. But training, I don't know. What do you think as far as training employees on dust, combustible dust?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think it starts with the awareness, making everyone aware of the potential hazards there. And then I know you're well versed in dust hazard analysis, and then just referring to the NFPA standards, understanding what a dust hazard analysis is, and taking a look, doing a go no go test. Do we actually have a combustible dust, or is it non-combustible? Can we relax? But if it is combustible, then working with consultants like yourself or someone like that can come in and help assess the situation, and then start to leverage some of these best practices and put safety measures in place. And you can't go from 0 to 100 on day one,
No.
but taking steps every day to create a safer work environment is I think got to be at the forefront of every manufacturer and producer.
It's got to be continuous improvement and continuous training. I think that after you get a DHA, they'll create a risk matrix or a path forward and attack the most important or the most critical parts first, or the most dangerous, the most hazardous equipment first. So they'll start engineering some of those controls in place. So that's usually the place to start, is with dust hazard analysis and dust hazard awareness education.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you've probably seen some misconceptions, or maybe some things that weren't quite right while you've been out in the field and working with many customers as you have over the years. Any of those come to mind?
Oh, a lot of them. I see. Every plant I go in is a different story, right? And
Yeah.
you could talk about they don't call me unless there is a problem.
Right.
So, I was on another podcast. And they said, "Well, do you ever see anybody that does it right?" Well, not really. They don't if they're doing it right, right? So yeah, we see people moving and trying to control combustible dust in hazardous ways. A big building products materials manufacturer has a specific location where they do welding, and it's outlined. You can only weld here, but it's on one side of the process. As I was passing this guy welding, I go underneath the process. Here's another guy with a big machine that he's riding around sweeping and creating combustible dust cloud. And I'm saying, I got a combustible dust cloud on one side of the process and guy welding on the other. I got to get out of here. That's the kind of stuff that we need to raise awareness about.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So finally, based on all of your experience and all your miles traveled and all your customers visited, what advice would you offer? Now we're talking that top-down approach, right? So what advice would you offer to executives and safety professionals who are looking to enhance their strategy for dust control? Where are they?
Really, they need to look at the applicable fire codes. All the NFPA documents for combustible dust are readily available on the nfpa.org website. You can sign up, register, and look at them for free. You can download them for a price if you want them. If you're dealing in wood products, NFPA 664 is the primary document you want to look at. They're developing 660, which is going to be an overall combustible dust manual. But there are specific manuals for each specific commodity that creates has combustible dust in the process. Agriculture, metals, all those have their own. And also, FM Global, a large insurer, has great documentation on their website for free, and you can download that stuff for free on how to protect your processes from dryers, conveyors, all that stuff. So those are the places to start, is to get the knowledge, and then understandable, like you said, get a no-go test on your dust, understand if it's combustible or not, and then create a path forward on how to address those issues.
Yeah. How about, I've heard of a book titled How to Keep Your Plant from Blowing Up or Burning Down. You familiar with that one?
Yeah, really. I wrote that kind of not tongue in cheek, but it's called The Ultimate Guide to Fire and Explosion Prevention: How to Keep Your Plant from Blowing Up and Burning Down. Just to kind of create an awareness when you're looking at the title that, what do I need to know? And so this book was written really for that frontline worker to help them understand what combustible dust is. And a lot of the topics we just talked about are in there and explained in more detail. And it's just explained in layman's terms. We don't use all the big fancy fire protection and explosion protection terms that you hear. But Yeah, it's available on Amazon if you want it. It's pretty cheap. I wrote it so students could get it and frontline workers could get it.
I love it. That sounds like a great resource to me. So in addition to checking out those NFPA standards, the FM Global documents, go to the OSHA website and download the National Emphasis Program document, become aware of that and understand what those inspectors are going to be looking out for and what they're aware of. Look at it through their lens and through their viewpoint so you can be ahead of the inspection when they come in. And then, of course, check out Jeff's book there. You can get it on Amazon. Highly recommend that. It's a great resource. Jeff, if people want to reach out to you specifically and get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Well, the email is kind of long, but it's Nichols at Industrial Fire Prevention, the letter J, last name Nichols, Nichols, no periods, at Industrial Fire Prevention.com, or they can call us 770-266-7223. That number is our office number, and if I'm not in the office, it's forwarded to my cell phone, so I'm always available to talk about combustible dust and fire protection.
That's great. We'll put those numbers on the screen and that email address as well so people can get in touch with you. If you are interested in information on fugitive combustible dust and how to manage that, feel free to reach out to us at www.sonicaire.com or check out our YouTube channel. We got a lot of helpful videos there as well on all things related to combustible dust and dust control fan technology. Jeff, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me for a few minutes today. I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate the time, and it's good to catch up.
Always a pleasure, Jordan. Great seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.